Hey guys, it's June 2nd, 2018, and this is your episode 148 of At Percussion. I'm your host, Casey Cangelosi, and with me, as usual, are Laurel Black.
Hi.
And Ben Charles. How's it going?
Hi, everybody. Doing well.
Guys, we have a guest co-host with us back from episode 80. You might remember Brian Nosny. How's it going, Brian?
Good. Thanks for having me again.
So, you guys, our guest today is a friend of ours, a composer and percussionist, and for at least as long as I've known him, he's just had a increasingly steady stream of commissions for percussion ensemble, chamber percussion, and solos. His compositions are being played more and more frequently all the time, and he's commonly receiving guest artist invitations. So he's really at this cool point in his career where it's totally taking off, and we watch this happen to them, and once it starts happening, it happens really fast, and suddenly it's hard to even hang on to. So he's kind of at that interesting point right now. So he'll be starting his third year with us at JMU, and he'll be just starting his dissertation next year, and he's got a full assistantship and stipend here with us, and we use that to have him share the workload with Laurel and I. He also teaches as an adjunct professor at Southern Virginia University. So if you're a regular listener, you've certainly seen him on the show several times. It's Caleb Pickering. How's it going, buddy?
Hey, good. How are y'all?
Just fine. So y'all caught up on Westworld or what?
So actually, I just got the HBO again for like a month. So I have my free month, so I'm rewatching season 1 to catch up, and then starting season 2.
I think you should. Well, shoot, no, I don't want to make anybody mad. I think you should watch season 1 of that, and then you should just skip season 2 and watch True Detective season 1.
Yeah, no one's really hyping on season 2 of Westworld right now, it seems.
Okay, good. I can't get into it. I'm trying. I can't.
Didn't get into the first season, as I remember as much.
I really liked the first season until the very end.
The first season of Westworld until the very end?
Yeah, I lost interest towards the end. I know.
Okay.
I know. I don't want to even share that because it's not. It's not popular.
Probably unpopular.
No, and it's a downer.
Yeah.
When have you ever cared about being popular, Casey?
That's true. That's a good point.
Yeah. I started rewatching the first season of Westworld yesterday, and yeah, having watched some of the second now, the first is more. It's almost more interesting because you understand what's going on.
Yeah, about more subtle things that have happened.
Exactly, and you don't you're not spending the whole time confused of like, wait, what? Are we in the past or the future, or like what the hell is going on? It's more enjoyable to me.
Caleb, have you seen True Detective?
I haven't.
Just watch True Detective.
Is that like Family Guy? But
It's good. True Detective is basically just a lot of mumble acting by what's his name?
By Matthew McConaughey and Woody Harrelson.
What do you mean mumble acting? What's that mean?
It's all those close-ups where he's just talking and he's like, yeah, and then we went to mumble acting.
I don't agree with that at all. I don't know where that comes from.
that's just half of my students. It's just that. Did you practice? Kinda.
Well, Caleb, it was actually, this is great. We're talking so much about Caleb. This is just what we thought would happen. So, Caleb, you were actually an idea for a guest of Ben's because he mentioned to me just a little while ago that a lot of students in Texas, and of course I see a lot of students playing your music and a lot of university ensembles, a lot of high school ensembles. Yeah, why are so many people playing your music now? And if they wanted to hear you talk a little bit, what would you be able to tell them?
Oh, that's hard. No, yeah, I think it just appeals. I think it just appeals to that age group a whole lot. That and it just tends to be fast and kind of angsty and angry, and yeah, I think they just like it. And it has large ensembles that you can get all your players on a lot of the time.
Are you angsty and angry?
Normally, yeah.
Yeah. But that actually, you bring up a good point. we were talking before we started recording about dissertations and stuff. Mine was on Christopher Rouse, and one of the questions I asked him was why, like Agumba Degree and Kuka Ilomoku, why they're still played to this day. And he was like, they're entertaining. They don't overstay their welcome. Like, they're these little kind of pocket-sized pieces that work well. And I think that's something that sometimes we as composers tend to forget is just sometimes we actually kind of want to somewhat try and make this marketable. Someone should actually want to play this ideally.
Yeah. I know some of those parts that I write are just hard, like really hard. And it's just, man, I can't believe, especially the high schools, when I see stuff played, and I'm just like, wow, that's better than I thought they would be. And then it's like not conducted. And then, it's just crazy what some of these high schools can do now.
Well, and speaking of what you said, these pieces are just appealing to this age group. I can tell you all something about Caleb. That's a nice compliment. He is very aware of how composers do, say, really technical compositional techniques. In our percussion literature class, he was always able to pick out everything that was going on in the piece. And we had a bunch of pieces that I feel like we did 4 different pieces that were all I Ching studies. And Caleb was really able to pick all those things out. Do you ever want to write pieces that really deal with some of that heavy intellectual stuff, or are you just trying to make a buck?
Oh man, money. Just send me to the bank. Yeah. No. I don't think that intellectual, but I don't know. I have I feel like I'm in an okay spot, but I kind of have a problem, not a problem per se, but I feel like the percussion world right now is split between, this delicately, like the more pop style is starting to get really, really popular. I don't have a problem with that because it's fun and it has its own place. And then the super intellectual side and, I don't know. I feel like they're both really alienating. Like the pop stuff isn't as substantive, and then the intellectual stuff isn't as appealing. So I just try to write as middle as I can, something that's not easy for the player, not easy for the listener, but is challenging for both, but within.
Well said.
Yeah, I think that split can, I talk about this a lot with my partner Marianne, with new music groups especially. You'll find people that are like, only new music. Anything else is garbage, and you shouldn't play it because you should only play the new music. And it's like, well, yeah, like I champion new music, but sorry, I also I enjoy Debussy, and that needs to be okay.
Right.
And it needs to be okay to enjoy the pop stuff that exists. Chin Cheng Lin has a lot of music that is certainly more pop oriented, but it is not easy, that's for sure. Alongside some of the heavies, and it needs to be okay to play both and enjoy both. And I think, especially as a performer, to be able to present those side by side, and they are both equal on the platter, on the stage,
Yeah, well, and I think also in the mix there is not just what you like, but what Caleb said, age group, what they like.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so, if Caleb's writing things in between, it's like, let's lead them into this other sound. Yeah, you need a gateway drug, as we've said before.
Yeah.
I have a buddy that, I won't say his name just to spare on this comment, but he played Con Variations and the Druckmann Reflections and something else on an art exhibit concert.
Mm-hmm.
And he was like, yeah, man, I really got to put this vignale in there because, it's so accessible and rock and roll. And I'm just like, what vignale are you playing? Grooves isn't that groovy. It's not that rock and rolly. It's pretty out for most people.
I would say it's out. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, there's a Kyle Gann used to write a music critic for the New York Voice for a while. He has this quote that I've always loved in talking about composers and thinking about their audience. He says, given a group of strangers assembled in front of your stage, do you feel an impulse to seduce, engage, enlighten, challenge, or insult them.
Wow, that's great.
And it's this great quote, but the thing that I always remind people when I say this is the one thing he doesn't say is ignore them. Sure. And so I think that the minute that you just ignore the audience and to heck with it, I'm just going to write whatever I write and I don't care what the audience thinks, like that's a problem in my mind.
Mm.
That's interesting because you also have Stephen Stuckey says that, you know, and we came across this in our percussion literature class from an interview of his. He said that there's no, believe me, even at the highest level here, there's no glamour in this profession. It all has to be because of what you want to do. But on the other hand, you need the audience, and yeah, you don't want to ignore them, but yet, I don't know. That's interesting. Those two quotes. Sorry, Ben, what do you got there?
I just want to say Charles Ives would disagree, as an aside. Right, Charles Ives, for the uninitiated, he sold insurance for a living.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And his whole thing was that if you did any sort of art for a living, at some point you would have to make artistic sacrifices in order to pull a profit, basically. And so he believed that in order to be a true artist, you could not be a professional, so to speak, as in someone who makes their living from art. But as a completely somewhat off topic here, one thing we've talked about a lot with Caleb's music is sort of like age range, and I think a lot of it is geared toward these Texas sort of state solo and ensemble sort of ensemble groups. And one thing I noticed a lot, because I actually coached one of Caleb's pieces, Dreadnought, a couple months ago at this point, is that one problem you run into is you have greatly varying ability levels within a group of high school students. You have this sort of like all region, all state kids playing marimbas, and then you have the kids that can sort of barely read music. And how do you create an educationally valid experience playing your piece with those sort of less capable players included in the group?
Man. No, yeah, I think you just can't. That sounds bad, but just gotta I don't care if people change like my parts as long as it's still like within reason. But like if you want to water something down, that's cool. I did a Skype masterclass, I think 2 months ago, and they were asking about this like 8 bars of just difficulty, and I just like, what? Just cut like these couple of parts out. It's fine. It's like basically the same still. We're just taking a few voices out. But yeah, I think that's less on me and more on like if you've got a group that can play Rouse, like Christopher Rouse is the max difficulty. You can't pull out like some Schwantner percussion concerto or something and expect somebody to do well. I don't know. I think you just have to play within reason.
Yeah.
Well, and what I'm thinking, though, is, Ben, would you say that that's really the composer's responsibility? To me, that's the director's responsibility of, hey, if I know I've got 4 hotshot kids in an ensemble of 12 and then the other 8 are not so great, well, then I can't, maybe program Crown of Thorns or some really, really heavy-duty large ensemble piece. Ideally, that would be the director having to make that decision. I don't think that the composer needs to.
Yeah,
if they want to be really marketable, then yeah, the composer might think about, well, let's try and make this part a little bit easier and stuff like that, and these parts will be a little bit harder. But I think at the end of the day, that's still the director's.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with you. I just think, like you said, the word marketable. Like if you're marketing pieces toward like the high school age level, that's different from, if Christopher Rouse writes a piece, it can be however difficult he wants, and it'll get played well.
Sure.
I of course think you're both right. It's yeah, Brian, you're right. It's not the composer's responsibility, but Ben's right. It would be advantageous if you could get create what you wanted to, and mold it to any high school situation if possible. And we're talking about high school, but man, I mean, we've played several of Caleb's pieces at JMU, and we've recorded them, and it's been fun. And I mean, I think it's good music for levels above that as well. What do you got?
I started doing something real recently, and I've seen this it's like starting to become a trend. Last summer I wrote for, his name's Joey Gonzalez, but he teaches at, I think, Lavernia ISD in Texas. He had me write a beginning piece, and I've kind of jumped on this train of you write the main ensemble, like these are our 5 or 6 players, and then you have like 4 auxiliary parts that if we need to cut somebody out, we can cut this, like these 4 parts can be totally removed, they can be doubled. So you have like the music part, and then for the people that are there for, you know, the kids that are going to be like lifelong banders, and then you have the, you know, maybe they're not going to be lifelong banders or middle school all banders, but you have a couple of pieces for them or parts for them that they can manage.
Yeah, right.
And be successful with, more importantly, not just, you know, Nerf maracas or B-list maracas or Nerf claves or something, or practice pad.
And they used to call that obligato parts, like parts you had to play. Like you're obligated to play this, but this could go without.
I don't speak any language besides English, so I don't know.
It means obligated.
Oh, really? Oh, man, it's nuts.
Obligato, obligation. You are obliged.
Everyone's learning.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I see
I'm a student. I have to teach him stuff. Ben, what do you got?
Italian words and the sheet music, I just pass over them. I don't know what's going on. Forte?
I was just going to say, if anyone's listening, Caleb dropped a very Texas term. ISD stands for Independent School District. I didn't know that until I got to Texas. So, yeah.
And it should be noted as well that everything we've been talking about has been Texas schools. And let's be honest, Texas players in high school many are freaks of nature. That is an island in the stream in terms of what we see nationwide. In terms of your typical Texas high schooler is usually vastly different in musical ability than a lot of people throughout the country. Not all, mind you, but in a lot of times it seems.
The politicians are amazing too.
Not
Right, Ben? How's it going over there?
I don't want to comment on that.
Well, I think it's maybe a good time to move on. So listen, I have a sound for you guys today, and the hint, the reason I brought Brian Nosny on this time, he doesn't know this, but the hint is Brian Nosny, Caleb Pickering, and I share this hobby, and so does Marco Shapiro. So obviously the hint is video games, probably. All right, there's no way in hell you guys are going to get this, but...
Get all your cursing out now.
Any clue?
When that robot voice kicked in at the end, I was thinking something, but I can't remember it now. Is it? I don't even know.
I mean, of course you think video games, man, there's so many soundtracks, so many sound effects, but this is something a little specific. Did any of you own the original Xbox?
I did.
Caleb, did you?
Yeah, I used to have it.
Cool. So the original Xbox back in 2001, so those of you who don't know, this is a game console, right? Used to play video games, hook up to your TV, and it's the thing about the size of a VCR. There's 3 Xboxes now. The current one's called Xbox One. Before that is the Xbox 360, and the first generation was called the Xbox, and that's what the sounds came from. So at the time of this console's release, 2001, the big buzz around its release was that the components inside of it were worth more than the price that it actually cost. Brian, do you remember hearing that?
I do vaguely, yes.
Okay, so like my buddies and I were all like, wow, it comes with this and it comes with that and it comes with this thing. And so they lost something, and I had a terrible time this morning trying to find out how much money they lost per console. And that's pretty common now. They still lose money because the components are worth more than the price they're able to sell it for. Like people just aren't willing to pay the actual
Just to be
value.
clear, they do, for anyone listening, they do make up, from what I understand, they make up that value on the licensing for the games. Like they make that money back. They don't just sell the systems at a loss.
Yeah.
Well, that is the plan, right? So in trying to find this, Ben, I found all this stuff about Microsoft and like have they actually made any money with the Xbox brand name, and it's like debatable. So, and yeah, most things are saying like, no, they haven't, they've actually lost like this. But anyway, I mean, it's like a long-term investment or whatever. It's stuff that I definitely don't understand. But as far as like dollar to dollar for the components, they definitely lose a little bit of money. So friends and I were all thinking, wow, you get all these different components, and if you wanted to, you could like open the thing up and remove the components and resell them and make money. So a lot of people were planning on doing that. When the Xbox came out, there were people who that was their plan. They would pre-order many of them, and they try to get their hands on as many as possible, because the components inside are what are called off-the-shelf components. So if you open a modern day game console, they have like a custom hard drive, a custom sound card that like only works for the interior of that specific system, and it's all locked up and coded for that system only. But the Xbox, although it was coded, it was like the same hard drive that goes in a computer, the same video card that goes in a computer. So these sounds were meant to supposedly were meant to freak out hackers, and there were sounds yeah, there were sounds embedded on the dashboard, which is like the operating system inside of the system. So Microsoft took sounds from NASA. They're all NASA Apollo mission sounds, so they're all public domain, and they edited the sounds. It's actually why that voice probably sounded familiar, Brian. It probably wasn't games that you heard it from, but it's probably from space Apollo missions. So of course they took those sounds and they edited them and they played with them to make them sound a little more high fidelity and a little spookier and da 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 da. But yeah, those are sound files on the actual console, so that any tinkerers would they would either try to deter them with that, or they would try to at least like kind of just like have a joke and wink at the people who are maybe trying to rip off the components inside of the system, because apparently that was something they were really worried about when they released it, and I guess they've since solved that problem. So that's your sound for the day.
Nice. Well, not surprising too, because when the original, if I'm remembering right, the original Xbox came out as a response to the success of the PlayStation. Yeah. So PlayStation 2 was coming out and Microsoft came out with the Xbox. That was their entry into the consoles, and so at that they were just trying to get any sort of foothold because the PlayStation was so dominant at that point.
Yeah, and at this time, I mean, to get a computer with those same specifications, it was pretty close to $1,000.
Oh, easily.
Yeah, so yeah, they're definitely in a competitive move. They're trying to outnumber the competition. Oh, we've got a better processor, better horsepower, so all the product is just going to be better. And yeah, are you laughing at me, Laura? Horsepower.
Horsepower.
Yeah, like a car.
Where's it going?
They say that like your computer's like guts, like how much horsepower does it have, like can it handle rendering the video editing for the podcast that takes hefty equipment. Yeah, I lost my train of thought, but it's okay, it wasn't too important.
That's
anyway.
Cool.
That was an entertaining sound of the day. That was good.
You're welcome. Yeah,
I appreciate it.
Yeah, very good. So I thought it'd be good to go. And actually, Caleb, I was shocked at the amount of serious Facebook questions we got for you. We got 2.
Was it like 2?
Yeah. So a friend of the podcast, a long time, at least listener and asker of questions, is Jade Hails. Jade, thanks for the question again. How do you find time to be an active composer / performer outside of school during grad school? I also want to know this. I think you do so much. How do you balance elevating your professional career and maintaining your academic career? He's got a laid-back professor, I'll tell you that, Jade.
It's true.
Yeah.
Not wrong. Man. Yeah, how do you balance it? I don't know. I don't know how it happens. I think the same thing came up with Brian Nosny here and a few other people on your committee meeting or panel meeting at last PASIC. I think somebody brought up how do you manage doing all this, and everyone kind of has the same answer. It's just like, you just do it.
Do it.
Yeah. There's a to-do list, and you just have to get it done. And yeah, you just got. I mean, if you have your personal life, your school life, and your, let's say, your professional, which could be like playing, writing, composition, whatever. If that's your third, I mean, one's always going to suffer a little bit. I think for the music world, I think we normally, our personal life tends to suffer a little more than most people's, because you can't be in a DMA getting like even B's. You shouldn't be getting B's at that point. So you have to, that should be priority one, is you got to like get the grades to go on the piece of paper. But after that, man, yeah, it's just, you kind of weigh your options. It's like, maybe you don't play 2 hours of Fortnite tonight. Maybe you try to finish 16 bars of new music, or try to like write a grant or anything like that. You just have to shoot the closest bear and go with it.
Yeah. Well, and this comes up, I swear this is the most commonly asked question. So, I mean, as soon as someone can explain how this is done, it'll be, I don't know, it's money waiting to be made or something. But it seems to me it's the grit. We've talked about the 10,000 hour rule, Malcolm Gladwell, that research, and the one we keep coming back to is that some people just have the grit for it. They just, they just do it. They just dive in and do it, and that seems to be what we keep seeing over and over. Yeah, Ben.
Well, I think also someone like I don't want to say this directly, but like we don't choose our careers. They sort of come upon us, I guess you could say. And like, I don't think Caleb started composing as like, okay, I'm a performer, but let me also start composing completely as a side business. And then the composing sort of overwhelmed and took over the performing business. And he said, oh, wait, I have to be a student also. Like, I think it's one person we're talking about. And so like, I think it's something that anyone that has these different varied aspects of their career, like they just sort of exist because they just sort of came up. I don't think it's something you really manage. Is that making sense what I'm trying to say? Yeah.
I think so. Yeah. Angela Duckworth, Grit. That's what I was thinking of.
Okay. Yeah. There's another one along those lines. There's a great book called The War of Art by Stephen Pressfield, and it's really short. It's a quick book, but it's basically his idea. He's the guy that wrote Legend of Bagger Vance. He's written a number of novels and I think some movie screenplays and things like that. But he's basically just like, okay, if you want to be a pro, if you want to be a professional in any sort of creative endeavor, from being an entrepreneur that creates a new business to being a composer to being a musician, an author, a video game designer, like I don't care what, if you're in a creative field of some kind and you want to be a pro, here's how to be a pro. And it's the things like you got to do it every day. Like, all of us, like getting in a practice room, you got to get in a practice room every day. If you want to be a composer, you got to write every day. There's no excuses. If you don't want to do that, then that's fine, but you're going to be an amateur. You're not going to be a professional. So that's one that I remember reading, and it was like, the light bulb went off, just like, oh yeah, this is all of it laid out right here for you.
What I have to share with you guys today is a topic that's kind of rooted all the way back in my childhood. So I remember being school age and in the summertime having to go like with my mom to the hospital so she could see the babies in the nursery. And I would listen to her speak to them in like baby talking voice, and she would move their legs and talk to them in this sweet baby voice. And I would be so confused and very snarky and just be like, Mom, why are you talking to them like that? They can't understand you anyway. Why does it matter? And without even looking away from the baby, she would say, oh, well, it doesn't know the words, but it knows my tone. And I was like, okay. So fast forward many years later when I'm teaching music appreciation and preparing kind of those first lectures, where one of my goals was to really convince everyone you have musical sensibilities. Maybe you're not a player, and that's fine, but you have the sensibilities. And so I was reading about, when do we start to develop these? And I remember my mom saying that as babies, no, you can discern tone. And so I talked to her further about it a couple of years ago and learned that babies can discern tone and timbre. It's why they know a mom's voice versus all other women's voices, and why Robin knows Casey's voice against all other men's voices. And why when we speak to him in certain sort of pitch patterns, he gets a big smile on his face, and other times he doesn't. And it tends to be when we're saying something sarcastic that makes us laugh, but he's just like, what? I don't understand. So it is this really basic understanding of tone, however simple it is. And then I read just last week that infants as young as 5 months old can tell when a piece of music is over. And this kind of I was like, what? So I started really poking around online looking for some type of study about this. And what I ended up stumbling upon that I was really interested in is a study that sought to understand not only when do we recognize something simple like happy or sad in music, but when do we start to understand the emotional differences in different styles of music. This is a study conducted by the Cognitive Development Lab at the Chinese University of Hong Kong by two researchers, and I will probably butcher their names, but it's Tixze Kerisu and Him Sheng. And their article was published February 2017, so it's somewhat new still. And it's called Infants' Sensitivity to Emotion in Music and Emotion Action Understanding. So they used 26 20-month-olds and 24 12-month-olds of mixed gender and mixed socioeconomic background. And their goal was to try to figure out when do you start to make the connection between music and emotion in your brain. Because they knew that music, even in kind of silly melodic forms, in terms of how a parent relates to a child, they'll often do it in a sing-songy tone. And so this idea of music and a simple melody, even from a really young age, like 2 months, 3 months old, starts to form the beginning of social learning for a baby. And coupled with that, they know that the ability to discern, interpret, and take social cues from other people's emotions are really important as you enter into adolescence and adulthood to navigate the more subtle complexities of our relationships, right? So they thought, okay, those two things together, maybe it stands to reason that continuing music in relationships when you're really young, still an infant, can aid the development of communication and understanding emotional affect. So in their study, they thought to answer 3 specific questions. They wanted to see if they could figure out infant spontaneous sensitivity to emotion in music. So not just pitch, consonants, rhythm, and meter, but could they understand whether this piece of music was happy or sad, to oversimplify it. Number 2, whether infants at the age range, 12 to 20 months, were able to represent others' emotion from facial vocal expressions to predict their actions. So that's non-music related, but it's the bridge between number 1 and number 3, which is whether emotional representation in music and non-musical emotion action understanding are naturally correlated, and if they are, at what age the relationship would become observable. So, to answer those questions, the researchers used a violation of expectation paradigm, which involved familiarizing the infants with an idea. For example, having someone sit in front of them and make a sad face and play sad music, and then later exposing them to a new face and new music that was either congruent or incongruent. So, for example, a happy face, but sad music would be an example of something that's incongruent for the babies. They hired actresses to make faces and chose pieces of music by survey. And 4 of the pieces, I don't know if this was all of them, but 4 of them were Saint-Saëns' Carnival of the Animals, Ravel's Le Tombeau, and Chopin's Nocturne Opus 9 No. 1, which is B-flat minor, and then Bruch's Col Nidrai, and I've probably butchered that name, but there's a gorgeous recording of Jacques Ledupré playing that on YouTube that you can find. So in order to answer these questions, they would time how long an infant looked at the face that was accompanying the music or accompanying a sound and an action. So for question number 2, for example, they would have an actress on stage looking at 2 toys, and they would be the same, like maybe the same teddy bear. They're identical, but there's just one on the left and one on the right. And the actress would look at one of them and either speak to it in a loving way or speak to it in an angry way, and then grasp a teddy bear. And so if they spoke to it in a loving way, they would grasp the teddy bear that they spoke to in a loving way. If they spoke to one angrily, they would grasp the other bear as if to like reject the angry one and take the other one, just for an example. So the study consisted of 2 different parts: the familiarization, which was the teaching, and then the test itself. So in familiarization, they showed each infant the same number of examples of either face and music or face and action, which is something that I just described. And in order to measure understanding, they would just time how long each infant looked at a particular combination of either face music or face action, and then they would figure out the difference between the 2. So in familiarization for both age ranges, the infants looked the longest at the first example, no matter what it was, and then progressively less and less as it continued, which implies that they knew what it was and they understood it. So it's less interesting, so they look at it for a less amount of time. And that was something important to establish, because you would think then as something continues that they would just stop paying attention at all, but that was not the case, especially when they got into the incongruent musical examples. And interestingly, the older infants looked longer always, suggesting that they could glean more information anyway. So you would think even an infant would become jaded with looking at something, but no, it's like it enters this new phase of taking information. So here's the results. Now that I've bored everyone with the details of how the study took place.
Oh, that's wild.
It's pretty cool, and it's actually the study with the youngest age group that they were able to figure out if they understood anything about music. This is the youngest, as far as, February 2017. So here's the results, and this is just lifted straight from the article, so I'll just read it verbatim. The 20-month-olds, but not the 12-month-olds, were surprised by emotional incongruence between musical and facial expressions, suggesting their sensitivity to musical emotion. In a separate non-music task, only the 20-month-olds were able to use an actress's affective facial displays to predict her subsequent action. So that was the whole yelling teddy bear, loving teddy bear example I gave you. Interestingly, for the 20-month-olds, such emotion-action understanding correlated with sensitivity to musical expressions measured in the first task. These 2 abilities, however, did not correlate with family income, parental estimation of language and communicative skills, and quality of parent-child interaction. These findings suggest that sensitivity to musical emotion and emotion-action understanding may be supported by a generalized common capacity to represent emotion from social cues, which lays a foundation for later social communicative development.
Huh.
Yeah. So there's a lot there, but I think one of the really important sentences is the one that it has nothing to do with the income, with gender, with the relationship between parent and child, but that these infants, once they're 20 months old, so a little over a year and a half, have this ability to understand emotion in music.
So, and just to clarify, the way, and I guess summarize, the way they knew that is, okay, person is smiling at baby's listening to sad music that shouldn't make you smile, and the kid is basically confused, right? So they knew, okay, the child's like observing this longer because they know it's incongruent. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. Wow. And
yeah.
So this is a cool thing I think about science, because the answer could simply be, well, we don't know yet. But was there a utility behind this? Did they say like it's valuable to know this because now we can do something?
I didn't dig into it that far. There wasn't in the article itself, other than they do relate it to being older and being able to navigate social situations, just understanding that. My mind went to, I reported about rhythm and certain speech impediments, I started to think about that. Like, well, perhaps music can be used as this way to develop communication, and rhythm is used to develop speech. So together in a couple of years,
I think they'll discover something, have no idea what it's going to be used for, and then 100 years later someone pulls it back out and cures a disease or something. You know what I mean? Like, ends up doing something really, really useful with it.
Well, and I think it's very interesting to me because, and in terms of the age of this, 12 months is not very old, and neither is 20. And previously they thought you had to be like 5 years old to understand emotion in music, but that was because the study was conducted in such a way that they would play music and then ask the child to pick a picture that seemed to relate to it the best, which meant, okay, well, they've got to know how to listen to music. They've got to recognize things in pictures. They need to understand the question, and then they have to make a decision. And then, it was about so many things instead of just, do you understand music, yes or no? Just the study itself, you needed to be older. So it's pretty exciting that it suggests strongly that in terms of nature versus nurture, that music is very much part of the nature part of being a human. Yeah.
You said this was a Chinese study that did this?
Yep, in Hong Kong.
I'd be curious if it had to do, I would imagine they used all Chinese children when they did this.
They did.
Because I read somewhere years ago that because their language is very pitch oriented, a majority of many people that have perfect pitch tend to be Chinese because they grow up with that idea of pitch and inflection already somewhat ingrained in them. So I'd be curious if they did this study with Americans or with, Brazilian children or Egyptian children, like if this would be the same or if it's not quite similar because there's a little more sensitivity to pitch and inflection and stuff like that in children that are around Mandarin more than others, maybe.
Right.
Yeah, that's a really interesting thought.
Caleb, I think? Or Ben?
No, not me. Not Ben either.
No, that chat's just got a line of me's.
Oh, yeah, those are from way back, man. You got to get on the chat. It's mostly jokes, but it's
I wonder if the language faculties probably come, probably around that time, right? Like, didn't you say it's language and memory start to come together, Laurel? But that's later.
Yeah, in terms of, that's what they think currently, that, your earliest memories are probably tied to when you had a word to associate with the mental picture.
Yeah.
Because if you don't have a way to categorize it, how are you going to remember it?
Right.
I just think it's so cool. Anything that's about showing everyone that, hey, music is a natural ability that everyone has to some extent.
Right.
I think is a really great thing. And, there are other studies that seek to explain the many benefits of making music some part of your life in some way. So I just think it's cool. Yeah, Caleb, what?
Yeah, way cool.
Just curious about, because I guess that's all dealing with hearing. But I know my earliest memory, I've always remembered, and it's so vivid, like it's like it was yesterday. I don't know the particular age, but I can tell you like the street, the apartment, just because I went in and out of it so many times as like a young kid. I had to have been like 2 or 3, but it was definitely being behind my mom's chair, eating cough drops, and I thought they were candy.
Ooh.
The taste was so bad. They're like, no, but it's just like that's associated. It's like that's the earliest thing I can remember is like that taste of like early 90s cough drop. I don't know. I don't know if this ties in as well as I thought it would, but I think there's something with like the senses and like anchoring.
Yeah.
So that reminds me. Have you
sensory emotion?
Have you heard of the concept of taste memory?
No.
So
I have, because I guess I had it.
Yeah. So it's apparently it's one of the most powerful memories we have. If you watch Chef's Table on Netflix, season 4, episode 1, Christina Tosi.
Wow. Pull that out of the air.
So no, there's this chef, and she was asked to make a dessert, and she decided for whatever reason to make panna cotta, which is like a gelled dairy dessert. It's almost like milk jello. And she said she was trying to figure out what to make, and she went into a grocery store for inspiration, and she saw cereal sitting on the shelf. And she thought back to like her earliest childhood memories. Like the best part was when you finished your cereal, you drank the milk that tasted like cereal. And so she actually steeped cornflakes in milk and made panna cotta with it. And like they called it cereal milk, and it like blew people's minds. And it's like this trend now that they make cereal milk ice cream and like cereal milk desserts. And it's like it instantly transports you back to your childhood having that memory. So that's totally a thing, Caleb.
Wow.
Ben, what do you have for us today? You're going to talk about some kind of music or something, right?
No, I was just going to talk about taste memory.
Yeah, cool. Or video games.
Completely unrelated, but one of the few times that I've hung out with Caleb in person, he was working on a piece called Silence Must Be. And I know I've played gesture-based pieces, and Casey has performed and written gesture-based pieces, and Brian has, we were talking about before we started recording, incorporated some gestures into his pieces. So I wanted to talk about today 4 solo gesture pieces. And by gesture pieces, I mean these are pieces that are written for the performer to basically wave their hands in the air to usually a pre-recorded audio, but there's no actual playing of instruments. And there are other gesture pieces beyond the ones I'm going to mention today. Particularly, there are a few ensemble ones. I think the most famous is Thierry de Mey's Table Music, which we'll talk about him as a composer in a little bit. And then there's a few, we're going to talk about a Mark Applebaum piece, but he actually has several works that incorporate gestures into them. But anyway, chronologically, I had 4 I picked out. The first one is from 2002. It's by the aforementioned, I think he's Belgian composer Thierry de Mey. It's called Silence Must Be. I was doing research online about it, and it's kind of hard to find information about this piece because it's not published, and I actually came across a score for it, which I think might have been illegal, but I just used it for research.
Go to jail.
I think, I could be wrong, I think this piece was written for the French percussionist Jean Geoffroy. If it was not actually written for him, I know he performs it, and it seems like he's very closely associated with the work. But there's a play-along track, and the play-along track is like these sort of quirky, rhythmic, percussive sounds, and there's also sort of like a metronome sound. The piece begins with the performer taking his pulse, and then it moves into gestures that like mostly resemble conducting, and there's sort of polyrhythm conducting where you're conducting 3/5, one hand's in 5, one hand's in 3, and so on, that sort of thing. There are some quotes from his piece Table Music. There's no table, obviously, but if you look at the score, it actually has basically the exact same notation as Table Music. At one point in the piece, the performer actually spells out the title of the piece in the air. The score itself is largely just a set of instructions. There's a little bit of conventional music notation, but it's sort of like play-by-play what exactly you do. As I mentioned before, it can be performed with this electronic track. It can also be performed with a duo partner playing the pre-recorded part, which I think Casey and Caleb did together. Mm-hmm. Thierry de Mey also has a 2011 work that I hadn't heard of till I was doing my research. I found 2 different titles for what seemed to be the same piece. I think the working title was in French, gesture music, I won't attempt, or sorry, in English, gesture music, I won't attempt the French. And then the other one was, again, the English title would be Piece of Gestures. But if you go on YouTube, you can actually see some clips of that. It's a percussion quintet piece with no sound at all. The next piece chronologically is Mark Applebaum's Aphasia. We had Mark Applebaum on quite a while ago at this point, and he also has an excellent TED Talk that's worth checking out. Aphasia was originally written for a singer with pre-recorded audio, but the score indicates that the role of the singer may be taken by any performer of suitably enthusiastic inclination and conviction. Thus, it's often performed by percussionists. Aphasia, just the word itself, it's actually a medical condition. It's often found in stroke patients, and it's the loss of the ability to understand or express speech. And Mark Applebaum translates this into a musical idiom by taking pre-recorded audio of a singer, and he processes it on the computer to a point that it doesn't sound like a human voice for the most part anymore, and then he choreographs what he refers to as an alien sign language along to the recording. The score at the top, it has sort of a waveform of the audio, and then underneath that there's an approximation of the rhythms represented in the audio, and then underneath that there are 3 lines. There's a right hand line, a both hands line, and a left hand line for the gestures, and all of the gestures have these little pictograms, and there's an appendix that describes what each one does, and they're all based on real world gestures including key turn, tear ticket, and fasten seatbelt. It can also be performed as an improvised piece with the same pre-recorded audio, in which case the title is called Aphasia Dialect. And it's very similar in nature to the second movement of his 2009 work called Straight Jacket. And in that movement, again, there's a soloist doing these gestures, and then in that one there's a quartet, a percussion quartet, performing the pre-recorded audio sort of sounds, but live. The next piece is from 2012, and I'm going to let Laurel pronounce the French title for you. The English translation is This Is Not a Ball, but the French title is, as Laurel will say right now,
doing her best, Ceci n'est pas une balle.
Which again means this is not a ball. So this piece was composed by the members of the SR9 trio, which they performed it actually at PASIC, I think was it this past year, if you saw that performance, 2017. But the performers in that group are, and I apologize in advance for my horrendous French pronunciation, but Mathieu Benino, Alexandre Esperet, and Antoine Nourier. Sorry again, guys. And then the soundtrack, there was also help from Olivier Pfeiffer. And so this piece basically, it's a mix of conventional notation and instructions with sort of non-conventional notation. Interestingly, the notation has these open and closed circles that you see in a lot of French snare drum music, which represent right and left hand. It took me a while to figure that out. But there's a solo version and a trio version, and in both versions, the audio is slightly different, but in both versions, it's sort of, the piece follows the journey of this imaginary ball. So the performer is sort of gesturing, bouncing the ball. At one point they crack it like an egg. At one point they throw it up in the air and shoot it with a gun. It has a little parody quote from Shakespeare, which I love. It's to ball or not to ball. And it includes musical quotes from Rage Against the Machine and Leonard Bernstein. It was performed by Alexandre Esperet at Trump 2012. And if you're listening in the U.S., it's kind of hard to get in the U.S. I had to order it from a European music website, and I actually thought there was something that had gone wrong and I got lost in the mail because it took, I think, over 2 months to arrive at my door. But I finally got it. I have the score here, and I just started working on it this summer, so it should be fun. And then the last piece I wanted to mention is from 2013, and it's from our very own Casey Cangelosi. It's called Bad Touch, which if you want to play any of these, Casey will tell you this is the one to buy. It was commissioned in 2013 by, can you pronounce the name for me, Casey?
Yeah, I can. Oh my gosh. I have to look at his name, though.
I got it.
Yeah, Palpan Mu Amnatham. He calls himself Mu because he knows I can say that. Yeah, gotcha. He's fantastic.
And what country is he from?
Thailand.
Gotcha, yeah, that's what I thought. So this piece, it's performed in a dark room, and the performer has a foot-activated sort of spotlight. The piece is in 2 parts. So the first half of the piece, the player has a drumstick that they're kind of passing around in the air, and there are these little swirling gestures that they do to sort of visually replicate all these quirky sounds in the soundtrack. And it includes recordings from a government experiment on hallucinogenic drugs. And the second half, which I believe is Pius Chung's favorite part, involves the performer drawing constellations in the air with LED lights, which is set to a Bach C major prelude. And like I said, that's by Casey. And the notation for that one is sort of like episodic, isn't it, Casey? You kind of say in this part, do this, and give some pictures to go along with it.
Yeah, sure. So there's some distinct sections, and because they're different, it calls for some different notation methods. But the hardest part, of course, is when you're pantomiming everything with the stick, because the licks are so specific. So yeah, there's just a lot of pictures and diagrams and arrows. Yeah, and then of course the constellations, just draw them, and I kind of just say, yeah, draw those however you want. That's a much easier part to learn.
Yeah, I think one of my favorite stories about that piece is that Pius said when Casey performed it, I think it was in Taiwan, he said that like Pius traveled with like his whole mallet bag, and Casey traveled with like a pair of mallets for White Knuckle Stroll and like literally like one beat up drumstick to play this piece.
Oh, it was so fun. Yeah, he and Erico, and I had this black shirt with a hole in it in the armpit, and they just teased me nonstop, like, you can't go to an international convention as a guest artist with a chewed up drumstick and a set of mallets. You just can't. And a shirt with a hole in it. They actually bought me a shirt.
They did.
In Taiwan. Yeah, was that the trip you were on, Laurel?
No, that's the one before, but they bought you a shirt. It's very tight, though. Yeah.
I know, they were like, it's gotta be.
I bet Pius picked it out.
I know. Yeah, terrible.
So, Caleb, you've played Silence Must Be. Could you tell us about your experience with that piece?
Thanks for putting me on the list, Ben. It's nice.
Yeah, of course.
No, it's good. I feel like after doing it myself and seeing Casey's presentation and performance too many times, it's just there's so much more depth to it than you see the first time. Like, you need a good 2 or 3 performances until you start to sink in like everything that's going on, because the whole thing is like divided. I mean, it even starts with you check your wrist, you check your pulse with your thumb. And if you know your thumb, you can't check someone's pulse with your thumb because your thumb has its own pulse. So you have these contrasting pulses from the get-go, and then it turns into 5 against 3. And then you have constant contrast. And then even the spelling of the piece is contrasted, because you spell, like if you want to do the S, you do the S normal with your right hand, but it's mirrored with your other hand. So it's this kind of binary separation throughout, and it's really cool. Bad Touch, on the other hand, I give it a solid B. No, I love Bad Touch. I played that one a lot. I do have to say, in the constellation drawing part, every time I performed it, I get to like Sagittarius, and then I forget, and then I just start making my own constellations.
I've definitely made up some of my own. Yeah. I did memorize them all correctly for the first recording, and then I kind of started letting it slide.
It's hard. It's harder than you think. Just thinking, 12 constellations, no big deal. But then when you think about it, it's like, okay, this is more difficult.
Surprisingly hard. But you're right about Silence Must Be. Like, that piece, there's so much coolness to that. Like, when I try to explain higher meaning in art, and you can be talking to a crowd of musicians, you can be talking to a crowd of non-musicians, you can use that piece, because Caleb's exactly right. It's all about these divergent pulses and contradictory pulses, all starting with you having this like contradiction pulse check, and then one pulse in this hand over here is in 3, the other one is in 5, and then they come together in 3. So the whole thing is about the 2 pulses kind of going back and forth, and he doesn't say this in any program note, but I can only assume, because it's just so evident throughout the whole piece. Every section is basically just some example of 2 pulses contradicting each other and then coming to a resolution. That the piece must be about some statement about having inner peace or inner understanding, having inner silence, and like being at peace with your conflicting pulses or something. Like, it's some cool metaphor for that. So
with all of these, it was interesting doing this research, because I started to think, like, we're almost to the point where you could do a recital of just gesture pieces.
I think it's been done. I feel like I've seen it on Facebook.
Like, I don't know how interesting that would be for me to see like all these back to back, because sort of the gimmick is the same, that you're pantomiming, you know, audio sounds. Granted, I think they're different, and they certainly all have their own flavor to them. But I feel like the charm would wear off after like an hour of sitting through them. But for me, one of the most interesting things is the notation of them, because there's no sort of standard notation system for these. And one thing I didn't mention is that when I was looking into this, there's a percussionist named Kyle Maxwell-Doherty that is actually either has written or is writing his dissertation on this. And yeah, there's a certain, I think it's called lab notation, and I believe it's borrowed from dancers, that basically they're trying to figure out a sort of standard system of writing these out, because, as I said, each one of these pieces has their own sort of system.
Laurel had heard of Laban notation. I had to ask Laurel, have you ever heard of this? This guy Kyle has emailed me about renotating my piece in Laban notation. Laurel had heard of it.
Gotcha.
Yeah, so it's really cool. His dissertation, actually, he takes aphasia, he takes bad touch, and I don't know if the other pieces were on your list, but he took some others, and he's kind of made a case for, hey, composers, there's actually already this unified language that at least dancers already know. So if you wanted, we could all be writing these pieces in the same language, and hence, you know, like do this whole thing faster, and the notation of one could translate to another. It's a cool idea.
I think the danger is that that's part of the uniqueness of the pieces, and that's like saying like, oh well, Xenakis, you could have written Safa in standard notation, but you didn't, and it made it way more complicated. Well, I think part of the adventure of learning that piece is the fact that it's not written in standard notation.
Sure. What do you got?
Rachel Julian, she's in Las Vegas. Her dissertation was actually taking a bunch of really big multi-solos and put it all into the timbre staff, the Hollanden version. And it's like, if you look at like Safa in a timbre staff notation, it's like, oh, okay, well, let's just read this bad boy down. Like it's funny, like it becomes this whole, yeah, it just makes things, as long as everything's not staying in like this same like perfect fourth area, like really chromatic fourth area, it makes things really easy to read. And if you don't know what timbre staff is, Hollanden's Dave Hollanden. Yeah, it's basically you set up the notation and the instruments even in kind of a piano staff. So say where C4 is, you have a tom-tom, where C sharp would be, you have a tambourine, then D you have a snare drum, D sharp you have cymbal, and so on and so forth. So you read it like pitch notation, and the instruments are set up like pitch notation.
Well, and his idea is that like a cowbell is always going to be C sharp.
Yeah.
The block is always going to be D natural or something. So yeah, there's some type of unified thing. So yeah, if you see Dave Hollanden's music, it's treble clef, and there's this X kind of through the G about, and then yeah, he has all these it's very hard at first, but it certainly makes sense. Sorry, Laurel, you were going to say something.
Interesting. No, it's just you might have to remind me. I think Laban notation, going back to that, is written vertically, not left to right. Yeah, so it's a completely new system, but I thought something we were talking about, a challenge with it might be that our gestures tend to be small. They're like very detailed with your hands, fingers, and arms, whereas dancers are full body, but perhaps not as specific with 2 fingers do this, and then.
So I learned that, and Kyle educated me that they have language for like your first knuckle.
Oh wow, okay.
Yeah, and I didn't know that either, but yeah, they have language for like every joint in your body, like anywhere your body can move, there's a way to describe it. And if you think this is cool, and it really does look like graphic notation, if you've ever seen any of these pieces that Ben mentioned, yeah, just Google Laban notation. And yeah, it's like, wow, this old graphic notation that's been around for quite a while for dancers. Yeah.
It's kind of interesting sorry.
Oh, sorry, but I think you're right. The issue is the verticalness. We're so used to linear, but I don't know. I mean, I think I think someone should definitely explore it. And certainly if you're going to do collaboration with dancers, it's definitely worth exploring, because if they already know it. And Kyle explains in his dissertation all the ways you could get around the rhythm, and yeah, it's neat. It's definitely a cool thing, I think.
One interesting aspect of performing aphasia, at least interesting to me, is that I think that I think I have a really good music memory. Like, I can remember virtually all the notes to any piece I've ever memorized and pull them out. But if I was going to try and play, for example, con variations, it would take me, I would say, at least a solid month in order to feel comfortable with all the intervals and all that sort of thing. But because aphasia requires no precision in terms of hitting a note on a keyboard instrument, like, you can't quote unquote miss notes. Like, I can get aphasia back up to performance ready in, I don't know, an hour or something like that. It's like, I don't know how you guys are with these pieces, but they come back very quickly, I think.
I've never forgotten the Silence Must Be.
Yeah, it's so physical. Yeah.
Hand.
I haven't done Silence Must Be in like a year, and I have the whole thing. I could do it right now.
I could do it right now. Yeah, we should do it as a duo.
Oh, that'd be lame.
Caleb makes me laugh. That's all I need from a DMA.
Casey,
anybody who's interested.
Casey, I'm curious, which is more fun for you, Casey? Is it more fun for you to do the gesture part or the sound part?
The gesture of Silence Must Be?
Yeah.
Oh, with the sound.
No, I mean, like, which part is more fun for you to perform, like to actually make the sounds or to do the gestures?
Oh, I get you. Well, I've only done it with Caleb, and I think definitely the gestures, I felt a lot of pressure doing the sounds, because it's like, man, he's got it memorized, and it's going to be exactly that. And yeah, I don't know, it was just weird, because I needed to read it, because it was so different from doing the actual gesture part, but yet I knew it. And it was also like, oh man, this was my idea. I told Caleb we should do this, and it's his recital, and if I screw up, I'm screwing up my student. So I definitely enjoy just playing it as the soloist. That's less pressure for sure. Yeah. What do you got, Brian?
Going back to the idea of like motion connecting so many things. I have a friend of mine that's was heavy into the marching, percussion side of things. He started as a tenor player, so you're moving around all these 5-6 drums, whatever and stuff. And then he went into another ensemble where he had to play snare, and he said it was so difficult for him because now you're just in this singular plane playing on a singular surface as opposed to all of the moving around. He said it took him forever to have to learn the music being a snare drummer, because of the fact that he was so used to actually having motion to move around.
That reminds me so much of, we had Matt Penland on like episode 9 or something like that. And when Matt plays that piece, She Who Sleeps with a Small Blanket, Matt was like a DCI tenor player, and he actually sets up the drums for She Who Sleeps Like a Small Blanket like tenors. Like, I think he puts the bongos all in the middle and the congas on the outside, whereas most people put like the congas on one side.
Right.
Yeah, why not, I guess, right?
Whatever works for you.
So guys, something you might not know about Caleb, and something that's been really fun having him as a student around here, is that I get to hear compliments from our colleagues, and whether it's at the coffee cooler or just they pop in my office or whatever, and I always get these great compliments about Caleb's classroom teaching, and of course I see some of his applied teaching, or I pop in to his classroom teaching in percussion methods. And yeah, he's just got a really good natural way about how he teaches. And I've had other faculty request him for certain classes and say, oh, it'd be great if he was teaching my extra ear training class, for example, or something like that. And I haven't looked up on Rate My Professor, but have you made Chili Pepper yet, Caleb?
Not there yet.
Can you tell us just a little bit about your thoughts on, say, classroom teaching versus private teaching?
Yeah, for both. And this is Gary Cook, who was one of my former teachers. This is kind of his mentality, so I'll preface it with that. Because if you just say it out of the blue, you sound a little pretentious without some background. But,
So you pin it on someone else.
yeah, you pin it on Cook. No, but the term teaching is one that he was really adamant we not use, which is funny because his book is Teaching Percussion. But he also, I think he is against a little bit of the title, but for the layman terms, teaching kind of comes across well. But really, I really like the term of facilitating of learning. But obviously, the facilitation of learning percussion is not a snazzy title to put on your method book. But yeah, it's really, and we've all had teachers that have done this. This isn't anything new, but it's definitely being more experiential learning. So less general teaching of let me show you how to do this. Okay, now you do it. Okay, now repeat. Okay, now you've got it. And very much more of just leading students to solutions or to answers. So basically, it takes a little bit more time because obviously the easiest way to get information to somebody is just to tell them what to do. But I think, and this kind of comes back to we were talking about Dark Souls earlier, the game. They don't tell you what to do. And that's why I think is what makes it so cool is you have to experience and kind of learn it as you go. And so everything becomes more personal and the knowledge you gain is way more ingrained just because instead of having someone tell you exactly what to do, you're just kind of given breadcrumbs and carrots along the way. And it kind of leads you to discover your own way. So yeah, I'm not sure if that answered your question or dodged it, but
I think it does. I mean, it's definitely useful for sure. I think it's tricky because someone could do what you described by the book, say like, okay, I've been told to instruct by giving breadcrumbs and use experiential learning, but if they don't have the right personality to fit with that, it's just, you may as well be, it's so much in your delivery and your people's personality, I think.
Yeah, I just honestly, if it's ear training or theory or percussion methods or one-on-one lesson, I just try to be, I don't want to use the word the cool teacher, but I mean, it's at the end of the day, it's music. And if it's percussion, at the end of the day, it's like playing beats a lot of the time, which is a lot of fun, and music's a lot of fun. So I don't know. I feel like we shouldn't have to make things like high pressure, high stress. Like it's stressful enough, like going through your plan. We don't need to turn this into a bash fest. We can like be relaxed and like talk about the subject and like have a good time and get work done. So I would honestly, if we have an hour of class, I would rather sacrifice 10% on something that is like engaging and funny and entertaining and keeps them more engaged than have it be a full 100% lecture, which I just can't stand.
Well, I think it's knowing, because I consider myself a good classroom teacher as well, and it's something I miss doing. I did a lot of at the last job. I wish I could find some more to do here. But yeah, it's like, and I guess I do it in percussion ensemble, of course. It's like, okay, we're very focused for this chunk of time, and then when it's time to just like breathe and tell some jokes and relax, and then you go back to a chunk of getting good solid work done, and then you take another breather, and it's probably, like you said, it's probably 15% relax and 85% strict. But yeah, some people don't know when to do it. You look at some teachers and it's like they change gears too quickly, and so yeah, I mean, I think it does take a certain personality intuition that I guess you have.
Yeah, it's the same thing with we had to do student teaching. Obviously, when we did elementary, it turned into, all right, let's do 5 minutes of lesson, and then it turned into, okay, 6 to 7 year olds, let's all get up and turn around, and we're going to do the rest of the next 10 minutes facing the back of the class.
Right.
And it's just like simple things, or it can be just like talking about theory, and you can see like everyone's glazed over from the 1-6-4 chord, and then you just say, so what do y'all think about Kendrick Lamar winning the Pulitzer? That's like a classic.
Right. Right.
And then you talk about it for 5 minutes, and then you go back to class, and like people are awake again. You just have to know when to like cast the line, because honestly, everyone is not. Even music majors are not not everyone is at the highest level of concentration as I think a lot of people are, or a lot of professors tend to think their students.
What you got, Brian?
Well, it's, I was just thinking, it's getting good at this. I think a lot of it is just a matter of self-evaluation. I think that, like, as musicians, as percussionists, we're always self-evaluating, like, all right, well, I just did a run through this piece. Now I'm listening to it, and I've got to work on that section more and things like this more. But a lot of times it's amazing how they don't apply, how teachers don't apply that to other facets of their job, like classroom teaching. I know that I'll get to a certain lecture and be like, okay, I know after like that obviously did not resonate with them. No one seemed to get that analogy or that whatever. Okay, I need to not do that anymore. Or you crack a joke and you're like, and nobody cared about that. Okay, that reference is obviously dead. No one knows that TV show anymore. Or what? So it's, you know, it's, I think a lot of it is just that self-evaluation that people tend to apply to only one thing. But if you can apply self-evaluation to all the things that you do and are striving to get better at, it makes all the difference, I think.
Yeah. Hey, well, we have one more Facebook question for Caleb. Overton Alford, who is a friend of the podcast and soon-to-be JMU master student, says, when did your composition start to take off? Was it a gradual process, or was it a sudden burst of, say, oh, hey, look, I could really keep doing this?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting because especially if you get into writing after you've already started playing. So I didn't start writing until I was a senior in undergrad, so I'd already been playing like 4 + 4 + 7, so like 11, 12 years or so. So I was playing for like 12 years, and then I started writing. And it's really interesting because you get good at one thing, and then you jump over to another thing, and you don't suck at it because you already have the musical knowledge, but you're not as good. Like, I was pretty good at drum set, and then I started writing, and compared to my drum set chops versus my writing chops, it was like night and day. Like, I was a terrible writer.
Sure.
So like, it's funny. Like, I still have on my hard drive, I keep my first 2 things I ever written or ever wrote. And yeah, I just look at them sometimes and it's like, man, this is objectively bad. Like, this, it's not a lot of saving grace. This isn't one of those things you can take out and be like, well, if you really look at this, you know, this is it. No, it's just like all bad. I got a title. If you got the title right, I think that's pretty good. But no, I think it's like anything. It's just gradual. And yeah, it's just step by step. Like, I know right now I'm the best writer I've ever been. And a year from now, I'll be better than I am now. And it's the same thing playing wise. I feel like right now I'm probably on the top of my game. In a year, I'll probably be a year more on top of my game. But yeah, I think the biggest thing, and I see it so much in like my generation or our generation, because we're kind of all 5 of us are kind of intertwined a little bit.
Yeah.
It's the social media thing. And it's like you get on there and you see these people winning stuff, and like you see like, oh, I'm going to this event, or I've got this new piece out, or I've got this new award, I'm playing this new concerto, or blah, blah, blah. And it's kind of funny because like all the social media, I use it to my advantage when I can, but I hate it because you only see the wins. You only see the successes. And really, one of my favorite quotes, and I always forget his name. I can totally look it up in a second. But it's, sorry, I have it written down.
Yeah, go ahead.
James Tolker. He's just a business guy, and he's a very successful business guy. And he always says that life is a series of failures punctuated by success.
Right.
So, yeah, it's one of those things where, I mean, sometimes I've been discouraged when I get on and I see like my colleagues and buddies, and it's just like, I'm going to this school, I'm going to this, I'm doing this, I won this, I performed this, I just wrote this. I'm just like, man, well, I got the Dark Souls remaster, so working on that. I've been through this Snare Etude book for about a month. I'm trying to finish it. And then, yeah, it's kind of, I'm sure other people think the same thing. They're probably like, oh man, Caleb's doing so well. And it's just like, what? Well, you only see the good things I post. I don't post the failures I have every single day. Like, yeah, it's a battle. But yeah, I think regardless what field you're in, you just have to persevere. You'll fail far more than you'll succeed, but I think that's kind of how it has to be.
Wow, that's a really cool answer.
Yeah.
Put that at the beginning, like just start it with that, like cut this section out, put it.
Right. Yeah, I got you. Yeah, it'll be great.
There was Jim Campbell sent me this podcast like at one point. I can't remember what the podcast was, but Vince Vaughn was the guest on it, and he was talking about this idea of success, and he said, okay, you people know me, you know me as an actor, and you can maybe mention like, okay, Swingers was the movie that I got my start. That was like my big break. And you can maybe mention like 5 or maybe 10 more like roles I've had, right? He's like, now think about, you can mention me for 10 things. There are literally hundreds of auditions within the years of all my career that I didn't get a call for, that I failed, that I lost. I didn't win that audition, but I've gotten these 10 things. So it's very much that idea of, yeah, we only hear, no one puts on their, on their Facebook, well, didn't get another grant, well, lost this job, well, lost another, like no one does that. Facebook land is very, very positive in a lot of ways, but you have to take it with a major grain of salt in a lot of ways.
Hey, let me just add something to Overton's question just a little bit. He talks about when did they take off? So you said it's definitely a gradual process. Was there a time you started noticing like, hey, stuff is picking up? And was there something, like, I feel like young composers are always trying to figure out, like, okay, I like composing, I am composing, I feel like I'm composing successfully, but I just can't seem to gain any traction as far as getting the music out there, getting to people starting to play it. So I wonder if you know, like, when that happened, or kind of when you noticed the tipping point.
No, I just always assume I'm doing bad, so I just keep trying to do better. No, but there.
Do you remember like the first time you sold a piece?
Yeah, I totally do.
So like we noticed those things, I do too. Like it was way forever ago,
Noticed the first. I mean, you noticed like a couple of goods, but yeah, I mean like the stuff I have published with C. Allen, like obviously they don't have the time to send me an email. Sold another piece. Just letting you know. It's just like it's not practical. But no, I mean I get plenty of invitations and Skype calls for clinics and commissions. So I just assume, for what I am hearing about, I just assume that there's at least that equal amount that I don't hear about. So hope for the best.
He's doing that thing politicians do. He's dodging the question. You guys see that?
I'm selling bootlegs in Texas for 50% off.
That's a good idea.
I'm selling bootlegs. See, that's the trick. You mark your stuff high on your own site, and then you bootleg it for cheaper yourself, so they buy the bootleg. And you still get the money.
So I have a question, and I don't know if this is okay to ask on air. You might have to edit this out, Casey.
Okay.
But so Caleb, we've talked a lot before on the podcast about self-publishing, and like obviously we know Casey self-publishes, and I know that a lot of your music is published through C. Allen, and I'm guessing, especially in Texas, that actually that is a case where their marketing materials can help you out as an individual quite a bit and get it on, performance lists and that sort of thing for competitions. So what is your take on self-publishing versus being published by a publisher?
I think if you can, I can name off the people, I'm not going to, but I can name off the successful percussion self-publishers. And yeah, I think people try to self-publish. Brian does, Casey does, several other people do. Ivan Trevino obviously does really well, but I think a lot of people try to self-publish, and it just, it's hard. Like you'll make all the money's yours, of course, so you don't have to share it with the publisher. But again, at the same time, like Nathan Daughtry, he sends pieces of mine to schools that he thinks would be interested. He helps promote it. He does a great job. They do a great job printing it. He helps me out all the time with other stuff, not music related. So, I mean, honestly, I have come to the realization from the get-go that I'm not going to make a career out of composition, at least not enough to sustain like rent or food, maybe food.
Don't read the chat, Caleb. You've been on this thing long enough.
I have it on full screen and it pops up on the pictures now.
You gotta learn how to man your Skype. Don't if Brian Nosney and Ben are here, you can't be reading the chat.
You're gonna have to. Yeah, this one's done.
Yeah, some of it out, but
we were so close. We were so close to the end.
So close. We almost made it.
Well, I think that's really great what you said. You know, it is about like, well, it depends on your particular relationship. You know, you hear about some composers and they say, man, I can't stand my publisher and I can't wait to get away from him. But I would totally agree. You know, Nathan Daughtry, I've seen what he's done with you and with your pieces, and yeah, it's really great. And of course, he's been on the show, and yeah, see him every PASIC, see him all the time. It's like, yeah, man, I would totally recommend C. Allen. And I would say, you know, you said a while ago, self-publishing is really hard, and I would just add to anyone out there listening, I would only say sometimes. It's either like very, very easy, or you get behind and suddenly you have a lot of work to do. But it's, I would generally say it's easy. But you could have a very detailed plan.
Mm-hmm. Well, and it also comes down to, you know, to a point, what's the project? This is something Campbell taught me. He was like, you know, he's like, if I'm going to write like a beginning, you know, bucket drumming piece, like, okay, I'm going to go to roll-off with that. Like, because I know that that's their market, that's their demographic. They're going to get it out there and it's going to sell. But if I'm going to write a really, you know, high-level esoteric kind of chamber piece, that's not their market. I'm not going to go with that. So maybe I'm going to self-publish that. Or maybe I'm going to try and, you know, give that to like a Bakovich or a Honey Rock or something like that more specializes in it. You know, so I think you have to really understand. I self-publish everything, but there's a couple projects I'm working on now that I know I'm going to seek out a publisher because they're for a very specific demographic that I don't normally deal with. And if I believe in the project and want it out there, I would like someone actually marketing it beyond just me saying, oh yeah, and I wrote this thing, maybe check it out. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, that makes perfect sense. I mean, that's the thing that they can do best for you. It's like, man, if they do the legwork for you of getting it to people, then that's what you want, you know. If you're better at doing that yourself, like if I'm writing solo marimba piece, like, well, if I record that and get it out there, I'll probably do just as good a job. Are they going to record it? No, they're not. Then I'll do a better job, you know. So that's a really, really good point. Depends on the project. Well, you guys, thanks so much. We went over time quite a bit, but Ben, Brian, Laurel, and Caleb, good to see you as always. And yeah, thanks everyone. We'll catch you on 149. Woo! Yoo-hoo. All right, bye everybody.
See you.